The temperature outside the farmhouse in Duluth dropped to 20 degrees below zero. However, the chill running down my spine had nothing to do with the Minnesota winter. I pressed my back against the heavy oak door of the master bedroom. My hands shook uncontrollably. I gripped the cold steel of the fireplace poker until my knuckles turned completely white. A shadow moved under the gap of the door. I held my breath. The floorboards in the hallway creaked under a weight that should have been small but sounded terrifyingly heavy. He was right outside. The person on the other side of the door was supposed to be my 10-year-old son. But I knew the truth now. The creature standing in my hallway was not a child. He never was. A soft knock echoed through the wood. It was polite. It was rhythmic. It was mocking. Then came the voice. It did not sound like the sweet soprano of an innocent boy who loved building Lego sets. The voice was deep. It was gravelly. It belonged to a grown man who had smoked a pack of cigarettes a day for 20 years. He whispered my name through the keyhole with a chilling calmness. He threatened to burn the house down if I did not unlock the door within 10 seconds. I squeezed my eyes shut. Tears streamed down my face as I visualized the scene downstairs. My husband Mark was lying at the bottom of the basement stairs. His leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. He was not moving. The phone lines were dead. The internet router had been smashed into 1,000 pieces of black plastic. We were miles away from the nearest neighbor on a road buried under 3 feet of snow. I was trapped in a cage with a predator wearing a size 4 children's pajama set. 10 hours ago. My life was perfect. I was Olivia Hartman. I was a successful pediatric nurse with a loving husband and a newly adopted genius son. We were the envy of the entire congregation at the Street Paul Community Church. Everyone said Noah was a miracle. He was a prodigy who could solve calculus problems at breakfast and, quote, Shakespeare at dinner. The adoption agency called him a gift. They were wrong. He was not a gift. He was a Trojan horse. The knocking stopped. Silence is often worse than noise. In the silence, the mind creates its own monsters. I strained my ears to hear his footsteps retreating. Hello. I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together. Hello. I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together. In fresh ink was today's date. Mark Hartman. Basement fall. Fatal. Olivia Hartman. Carbon monoxide poisoning. Midnight. I looked at the digital clock on the bedside table. The red numbers glowed in the darkness. It was 11:55 at night. I had 5 minutes left to live according to his schedule. The axe slammed into the door again. The lock gave way with a metallic screech. The door slowly creaked open. Noah stood in the doorway. The hallway light cast a long shadow over his small frame. He was wearing his favorite dinosaur pajamas. But in his right hand, he dragged the heavy fire axe across the floorboards. He tilted his head to the side. He smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. He stepped into the room and kicked the door shut behind him. I realized then that nobody was coming to save me. The snowplows would not run until morning. The police could not hear my screams over the howling wind of the blizzard. I had to kill this monster, or I would become just another name in his journal. He raised the axe. I tightened my grip on the poker. I prepared to fight for my life against the thing I had tucked into bed every night for 6 months. 6 months ago. The silence in our house was different. It was the silence of emptiness. Mark and I had spent $70,000 on fertility treatments over 5 agonizing years. We mortgaged our farmhouse near Lake Superior twice. We sold Mark's vintage Mustang. We drained our retirement accounts. However, the result was always the same. There were negative pregnancy tests. There were tears in the bathroom at 3 a.m. There was a hollow ache in my chest that refused to go away. We were desperate. Desperation creates blind spots. Desperation makes you open your door to the devil because he is holding a bouquet of flowers. We decided to adopt. The agency in Minneapolis called us on a Tuesday afternoon in October. The caseworker was a woman named Miss Thornton. She told us she had a special case that required a medical background like mine. She described Noah. She said he was 10 years old. She said he was the sole survivor of a horrific house fire in Chicago that killed his parents and destroyed all his birth records. She explained that the trauma had made him selectively mute and extremely shy. However, she emphasized that his intelligence scores were off the charts. We drove 3 hours through the driving rain to meet him. I remember the first time I saw him sitting in the recreation room of the orphanage. The other children were playing video games or watching cartoons on the television. Noah was sitting alone in a corner. He was wearing a tweed vest and a bow tie that looked ridiculous on a child his age. He was reading a hardcover book. I walked closer to see the title. It was not a comic book. It was a university-level textbook on structural engineering. He looked up at me. His eyes were dark and intense. He did not smile. He analyzed me. I felt like a specimen under a microscope rather than a potential mother. But then he blinked. The intensity vanished. He lowered his head shyly and reached out a small, pale hand to touch my sleeve. My heart melted instantly. I mistook his calculation for vulnerability. The adoption process was unusually fast. The agency seemed eager to place him. They waived several waiting periods because of our stable home environment and my nursing credentials. Miss Thornton handed us a thick file of medical records. She mentioned that Noah had a rare hormonal condition called hypopituitarism. She explained that it stunted his physical growth and required daily medication. I looked at the prescription. It was complex, but as a nurse, I thought I could handle it. I did not question why a 10-year-old boy had the facial bone structure of someone much older. I told myself it was just the tragedy of his genetics. We brought him home to Duluth in November. The first month was a dream. Noah was the perfect child. He kept his room immaculate. He made his bed with military precision every morning. He never threw tantrums. He never asked for toys. He spent hours in the basement woodshop with Mark, helping him build birdhouses. Mark was ecstatic. He finally had the son he had always wanted. But the dog knew. We had a golden retriever named Buster. Buster was the friendliest animal in the state of Minnesota. He loved everyone. However, the moment Noah stepped into the house, Buster stopped wagging his tail. He lowered his ears. He let out a low growl that vibrated in his chest. Noah looked at the dog. He did not show fear. He showed contempt. 2 weeks later, Buster disappeared. We searched the woods for 3 days. Noah helped us search. He called the dog's name with a flat, monotone voice that sent shivers down my spine. We eventually found Buster at the bottom of the old dried-up well on the edge of our property. The veterinarian said the dog had fallen and broken his back. I cried for 2 days. Mark buried the dog under the oak tree. While we were crying, I looked out the kitchen window. Noah was standing by the grave. He was not crying. He was eating an apple. He looked satisfied. That was the first crack in the illusion. Strange things began to happen around the house. I would wake up in the middle of the night and smell cigarette smoke. Neither Mark nor I were smokers. When I checked Noah's room, he was sound asleep, but the window would be cracked open an inch. Then there was the issue of his privacy. Noah was obsessively modest. He never let me help him bathe. He locked the bathroom door for an hour at a time. He demanded to wash his own clothes. One day, I tried to enter the bathroom to get a towel while he was showering. He screamed. It was not a scream of embarrassment. It was a scream of pure rage. He threw a bottle of shampoo at the door with enough force to crack the wood. Mark told me to give the boy space. Mark said Noah was traumatized from the fire. Mark made excuses for everything. But the most disturbing incident happened at the local elementary school. Noah was placed in the 5th grade. His teacher was a young woman named Mrs. Higgins. She called me for a meeting after the first month. She looked pale and nervous. She showed me a drawing Noah had made during art class. The assignment was to draw what they wanted to be when they grew up. Other children drew astronauts or firefighters. Noah had drawn a picture of a human body. But it was dissected. The organs were labeled with perfect anatomical Latin names. The heart, the lungs, the liver. And next to the drawing, he had written a single sentence in elegant cursive handwriting. The inside is more honest than the outside. Mrs. Higgins told me that Noah corrected her during history lessons. She said he knew details about the Vietnam War and the stock market crash of the 80s that a 10-year-old should not know. She said the other children were terrified of him. I defended him. I told her he was a genius. I threatened to report her to the school board for discrimination. I was a mother lion protecting her cub. I did not realize I was protecting a viper. The tension in our marriage began to grow. Mark accused me of being paranoid when I brought up my concerns. He said I was looking for problems because I was afraid of being happy. He spent more and more time in the basement with Noah. They were building something. Noah said it was a surprise for me. I felt isolated. I felt like a stranger in my own home. Yesterday morning, I decided to deep clean Noah's room while he was at school. I wanted to find the source of the cigarette smell. I checked under the mattress. I checked the pockets of his winter coats. I found nothing illegal, but I found something strange. Hidden inside a hollowed-out space in his bedpost was a small velvet bag. Inside the bag were 3 items. A gold wedding ring that looked too large for a woman but too small for a man, a set of car keys for a 1995 Ford sedan, and a driver's license. The license was old and faded. The photo showed a man with dark hair and cold eyes. The name on the license was Arthur Penhaligon. The birth date indicated the man would be 33 years old today. I stared at the photo. The eyes were familiar. They were the same eyes that looked at me across the dinner table every night. I put the items back. My hands were trembling. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a keepsake from his father. Maybe Arthur was his real father who died in the fire. Then came the accident. Mark called me at work at 2 in the afternoon. His voice was slurred. He said he had fallen down the basement stairs. He said he couldn't feel his legs. He said Noah was with him and was calling 911. I rushed home. The ambulance had not arrived. The driveway was empty. I ran into the house calling for Noah. The house was silent. I found Mark at the bottom of the stairs. He was unconscious but breathing. I knelt beside him to check his pulse. That was when I saw the tripwire. It was a piece of clear fishing line tied tightly across the top step. It was invisible in the dim light. It was not an accident. It was a trap. I heard a footstep on the floor above me. I looked up. Noah was standing at the top of the stairs. He was holding the phone, but he wasn't talking to 911. He was just holding it. The line was dead. He looked down at me and Mark. He did not look worried. He looked annoyed that Mark was still breathing. "He has strong bones," Noah said. His voice dropped an octave. The child facade slipped away completely. "Most people break their necks on the first tumble." I gasped. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The ring, the license, the knowledge, the cigarette smoke, the hatred of doctors. He wasn't a child with a hormonal disorder. He was Arthur Penhaligon. He was a 33-year-old sociopath hiding in the body of a boy. And he had just tried to murder my husband. I grabbed the fire poker from the basement fireplace and ran up the stairs. He retreated to the kitchen. I ran to the master bedroom and locked the door. And that brings us back to the axe. The wood around the handle gave way with a final crack. The door swung open. Noah, or Arthur, or whatever his name was, stepped into the bedroom. He adjusted his grip on the axe handle. He looked at the heavy snow falling outside the window behind me. "Nobody is coming, Olivia," he said calmly. "It's just you and me. Let's finish this." He swung the axe. The heavy blade buried itself deep into the mattress right where my legs had been a split second before. White goose feathers exploded into the air like a sudden snowstorm inside the bedroom. I rolled off the other side of the bed. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I scrambled to my feet. "Hello. I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together." My first instinct was to get to the basement. I had to save Mark. I needed to check if he was still breathing. However, Noah anticipated my move. "Don't bother, Olivia," he shouted from the bedroom doorway. His voice echoed through the house. "I cut the heating pipes. The basement is already flooding. He will drown before he freezes." I stopped at the top of the landing. I looked down into the darkness of the lower level. I heard the sound of rushing water. Tears stung my eyes. But I knew going down there now was suicide. I would be trapped in the water with a killer standing on dry ground above me. I needed a weapon. I needed an advantage. I turned and ran toward the guest bedroom at the end of the hall. It was the only room with a heavy lock on the inside. I threw myself inside and slammed the door. I turned the deadbolt just as a heavy body slammed against the wood from the outside. He laughed again. He started chopping at this door too. I scanned the room frantically. This was Mark's hunting storage room. But Mark was a responsible gun owner. The gun safe was in the basement. The ammunition was locked in the garage. There were no firearms here. There was only a closet full of winter coats and boxes of old documents. I dragged a heavy dresser in front of the door to buy myself time. The axe blows were rhythmic. Thud. Splinter. Thud. Splinter. He was not rushing. He was enjoying the hunt. He knew I had nowhere to go. I backed away into the closet to hide. I tripped over a loose floorboard. "Hello. I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together." "Hello. I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together." I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to go out the window. I opened the window. The wind hit me like a physical punch. The temperature was 20 below zero. The roof was covered in ice. A fall from this height would break my legs, but staying here meant burning to death. I climbed out onto the icy shingles. The wind howled in my ears. I gripped the frozen gutter with numb fingers. Below me, the snow was piled high in a drift against the side of the house. I looked back. The bedroom door burst open. Flames roared into the room. Noah stood in the middle of the fire. He was wearing a gas mask now. He looked like a demon from hell. He saw me at the window. He raised a handgun, Mark's handgun that he must have stolen earlier. He fired. The glass shattered next to my head. I jumped. I plummeted 2 stories down into the darkness. I hit the snowbank with a bone-jarring impact. The cold powder filled my mouth and nose. I tumbled down the drift and landed on the frozen driveway. Pain shot through my left ankle. I tried to stand. My leg collapsed. It was sprained, maybe broken. I looked up at the house. Flames were licking out of the second-story windows. The silhouette of a small man stood at the window watching me. He lowered the gun. He did not shoot again. He turned and walked away from the window. He was coming downstairs. He was coming outside to finish me off. I dragged myself through the snow toward the garage. I needed a car. I needed a weapon. I needed a miracle. The garage door was closed. I punched the keypad code. Nothing happened. He had cut the power to the garage, too. I was locked out. Then I remembered the old tool shed behind the garage. Mark kept his chainsaw there. I crawled through the deep snow. My pajamas were soaked. My skin was burning from the cold. Hypothermia would set in within 15 minutes, but the killer would be here in 2. I reached the shed. The padlock was frozen. I smashed it with a rock until my hands bled. It snapped open. I fell inside. The smell of oil and sawdust was comforting. I grabbed the chainsaw. It was heavy. It was cold. I pulled the starter cord. It sputtered and died. I pulled it again. Nothing. The engine was too cold. I heard the back door of the house open. Footsteps crunched on the snow. He was whistling a lullaby. "Rock-a-bye, baby," on the treetop. I pulled the cord a 3rd time with every ounce of strength I had left. I screamed in frustration. The engine roared to life. The chain spun with a lethal hum. I turned to face the door of the shed just as Noah appeared. He was not wearing his coat. He was still in his pajamas and the gas mask. He held the gun in one hand and a flashlight in the other. He aimed the gun at my chest. "Put down the toy, Mommy," he said. His voice was muffled by the mask. "Or I put a bullet in your brain." I revved the chainsaw. I stepped forward. I looked him in the eye. "Shoot me." I challenged him. My voice was steady. "But at this range, if I fall, the saw falls on you." He hesitated. For the first time, the calculation in his eyes faltered. He was a manipulator. He was a poisoner. He was a trapper. "Hello. I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together." He told me to turn off the saw. He wanted to hear me beg before he pulled the trigger. I reached for the switch. However, my eyes locked onto his hand holding the gun. He was not wearing gloves. He had been so arrogant. He had been so focused on the fire and the axe that he ignored the elements. I saw something that a layman would miss. But I was a nurse with 15 years of experience in trauma care. His skin was not just pale, it was waxy and yellow. His fingernails were dark blue. But most importantly, his trigger finger was rigid. It was curled around the trigger in a fixed claw. My mind flashed back to his medical file. Hypopituitarism, severe circulatory deficit, impaired thermoregulation. His condition meant his body could not generate heat efficiently. He was trapping himself in a 33-year-old mind inside a 10-year-old body that was physiologically incapable of surviving this cold. He was not just cold. He was in the advanced stages of frostbite. The nerves in his extremities were dead. He couldn't feel his own hands. He didn't know it yet. A sudden calm washed over me. The fear evaporated. It was replaced by the cold calculation of a surgeon finding a tumor. I looked up at him. I took my hand off the kill switch. I gripped the handle tighter. I told him to go ahead and shoot. He sneered behind the mask. He squeezed his hand. Nothing happened. The gun did not fire. He frowned. He looked at the gun. He squeezed again. I saw the tendons in his wrist strain, but his finger did not move. It was frozen solid against the metal guard. The synapse signals were firing from his psychopath brain. But the frozen nerves in his child hand were not receiving them. Panic flared in his eyes. For the first time, the predator realized he was broken. He tried to use his other hand to force the finger. He dropped the flashlight. The beam spun wildly across the shed. "It's over, Arthur," I whispered. "Your body failed you before I did. I did not attack him. I did not try to cut him with the saw. That would be murder. I had a better plan. I swung the chainsaw. But I aimed it at the floor. Specifically, I aimed it at the thick wooden support post standing right next to him. The shed was old. The roof was heavy, with 3 feet of wet snow and ice. The only thing holding tons of crushing weight above our heads was that single rot-infested beam. The chainsaw teeth bit into the dry wood. The sound was a scream of destruction. Sawdust sprayed into the air. Noah screamed. He understood the physics instantly. He lunged at me. He tried to club me with the gun he couldn't fire. It was too late. The blade sliced through the timber like butter. I felt the tension in the roof release with a groan that sounded like thunder. I let go of the saw. I rolled backward toward the open door of the shed. I threw myself into the deep snow just as gravity took over. The roof of the shed collapsed. It did not fall slowly. It imploded. Thousands of pounds of timber, shingles, and solid ice crashed down in a single violent motion. The sound was deafening. It shook the ground beneath me. A cloud of snow and dust exploded outward. It buried me for a moment. Then, silence returned. The chainsaw engine had died. The wind howled through the trees. The fire in the main house crackled in the distance. I lay in the snow. I gasped for air. I waited for movement from the pile of debris. Nothing moved. However, I knew horror movies. I knew the killer always comes back for one last scare. I dragged myself upright. I found a shovel leaning against the exterior wall of the garage. I held it like a spear. I approached the ruins of the shed. A hand was sticking out of the rubble. It was small. It was pale. It was still clutching the gun. Then the debris shifted. Noah's head popped up from a gap in the broken shingles. The gas mask had been knocked off. His face was covered in blood. His child mask was gone. His expression was twisted into pure hatred. He was pinned. A heavy support beam was crushing his legs. He couldn't move. But he was still alive. He looked at me. He spat blood onto the white snow. He hissed that I couldn't kill him. He said he was a survivor. He said he would get out and find me. I looked down at him. I felt no pity. I felt no fear. I only felt the cold clarity of survival. I realized something else. The fire in the main house was spreading. The heat was melting the snow on the roof. The water was running down into the basement. Mark. I had to save Mark, but I couldn't leave this monster alive behind me. He was trapped. But traps can be broken. Then I saw it. The fuel line of the chainsaw had been severed in the collapse. Gasoline was leaking onto the wood debris. It was pooling around Noah's trapped body. The fumes were strong. I looked at the burning house. Then I looked at the trail of gasoline leading from the shed toward the sparks flying from the porch. Fate was offering me a choice. I could walk away and let the cold finish him, or I could ensure he never hurt anyone again. Noah saw my eyes follow the gasoline trail. His eyes widened. The arrogance vanished. He started to whimper. It was the first time he sounded like the child he pretended to be. "Mommy," he pleaded. "Please. I'm cold." I tightened my grip on the shovel. I leaned in close. "I'm not your mother," I said. "And you're not a child." I turned my back on him. I did not light the fire myself. I did not have to. A burning ember from the house roof drifted on the wind. It glowed orange in the night sky. It danced like a firefly. It floated slowly down toward the puddle of gasoline leaking from the shed. I started running toward the basement storm doors. Behind me, the night turned into day. A boom of ignition shook the ground. The scream that followed was not human, and then it was cut short. I did not look back. The heat from the burning shed pushed me forward. Behind me, the monster was gone. However, the man I loved was still drowning in the dark. I scrambled over the frozen lawn toward the bulkhead doors leading to the basement. The main house was a towering inferno. The windows blew out one by one. Glass rained down like glittering daggers. The roof groaned under the weight of the snow and the fire. It would collapse within minutes. I reached the metal storm doors. They were frozen shut with a thick layer of ice. I still had the shovel. I smashed the blade against the latch. Sparks flew. I struck it again, and again. I screamed with every blow. The lock shattered. I yanked the heavy doors open. A cloud of black smoke billowed out. It was followed by the sound of rushing water. I peered into the darkness. The basement was flooding rapidly. The pipe Noah cut must have been the main water line. The water level was already waist-deep. Floating debris bobbed on the surface like shipwreck wreckage. I saw Mark. He was clinging to the bottom of the wooden staircase. The water was up to his chin. His face was gray. His eyes were rolling back in his head. The cold water was sucking the life out of him faster than the fire above. I did not think. I jumped. The freezing water hit me like a shockwave. It stole the breath from my lungs. I waded through the oily black sludge. I reached him. I grabbed his collar. He groaned. He was barely conscious. He whispered that he couldn't move his legs. I told him I would be his legs. I wrapped my arms around his chest. I pulled. He was heavy. He was dead weight. The water fought me. The smoke choked me. Above us, the floorboards of the kitchen began to sag. Flaming embers drifted down through the cracks. I dragged him toward the open bulkhead doors. My muscles screamed in protest. Every step was a battle against gravity and exhaustion. We reached the concrete steps. I pushed him up. I climbed behind him and shoved. We tumbled out onto the snow just as the house gave up the ghost. With a sound like a dying beast, the main support beams snapped. The first floor collapsed into the basement. A massive plume of sparks and smoke shot into the night sky. The place where Mark had been floating seconds ago was now buried under tons of burning timber. We lay in the snow. We gasped for air. The radiant heat from the fire kept us from freezing. But we were homeless. We were battered. We were alive. 10 minutes later, the world turned blue and red. Sheriff Miller was the first to arrive. His cruiser skidded to a halt in the driveway. The flashing lights illuminated the devastation. He ran toward us with a blanket. He looked from me to the burning house to the smoldering ruins of the shed. He asked what happened. He asked where the boy was. I pointed to the shed. I did not speak. I couldn't. The adrenaline was fading. The shock was setting in. The next few hours were a blur of paramedics and questions. They loaded Mark into an ambulance. They treated my ankle. They wrapped me in thermal blankets. The fire department fought the blaze until dawn. But there was nothing to save. The farmhouse was gone. However, the truth survived the fire. 3 days later, I sat in Sheriff Miller's office. The room smelled of stale coffee and old paper. The sheriff placed a thick file on the desk. He looked tired. "Hello. I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together." We were supposed to be number 5. The sheriff slid a plastic bag across the desk. Inside was the charred remains of the journal I found. The lab had recovered some of the pages. "You were right, Mrs. Hartman," the sheriff said quietly. "He had a schedule. You were supposed to die at midnight." I looked at the bag. I felt a cold chill. But it wasn't fear anymore. It was validation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't a paranoid mother. I was the one who stopped him. The sheriff told me that they also found the offshore accounts. The money Arthur stole from us was recovered. It was enough to pay the hospital bills. It was enough to rebuild. However, the most important discovery was in the trunk of Arthur's car found hidden in the woods. He had kept trophies, lockets, rings, photos of his previous victims. Because of my actions, 4 cold cases were solved overnight. 4 grieving families finally got closure. They knew their loved ones weren't careless. They were murdered. I stood up. I walked to the window. Outside, the sun was shining on the snow. It was a bright, cold day. I thought about the drawing Noah made. The dissected body. The inside is more honest than the outside. He was right. On the outside, he was an innocent child. On the inside, he was a monster. But I realized something else about myself. On the outside, I was just a nurse. I was a soft, suburban wife. But on the inside, I was a survivor. I was a warrior who walked through fire and ice to save the man I loved. Mark was going to walk again, the doctors promised. It would take months of physical therapy. But he was alive. I left the police station. I drove to the hospital. I had a husband to take care of. And for the first time in 6 months, I wasn't afraid of the dark. 1 year has passed since the fire. The snow has melted and returned again. The blackened foundation of our old farmhouse is still there in the woods. We never went back to rebuild it. Some places are too stained by evil to ever be called home again. Mark and I live in a small apartment in downtown Minneapolis now. We are surrounded by people. We are surrounded by noise. We like it that way. Silence still makes us nervous. Mark walks with a cane. The doctors had to put 3 titanium pins in his leg. Every time I hear the rhythmic click of his cane on the pavement, I do not feel sad. I feel grateful. That sound is the sound of survival. It is the sound of a man who refused to die. We did not adopt again. The agency offered us counseling. They apologized profusely for their negligence in vetting Noah's background. They called it a tragic administrative error. I did not sue them. I simply told them to burn my file. I told them I was done looking for a family. I realized I already had one. It was just me and Mark, and that was enough. People often ask me how I recovered. They ask if I have nightmares. I tell them the truth. I do have nightmares. Sometimes I wake up sweating because I hear a child crying in the walls. Sometimes I reach for a fire poker that isn't there. However, trauma is a strange teacher. It takes away your innocence, but it gives you something else in return. It gives you vision. I see the world differently now. I see the cracks in the perfect pictures. When I see a charming stranger smiling too much at a grocery store, I don't smile back. I watch his hands. When I hear a story that sounds too good to be true, I don't believe it. I investigate it. The most important lesson I learned was not about adoption. It was not about background checks. It was about listening to the quiet voice inside your head. For months, my gut told me something was wrong. My dog told me something was wrong. Even the cold air in my house felt wrong. But I ignored it. I ignored it because I wanted to be nice. I wanted to be a good mother. I wanted to fit into the picture of a happy family that society painted for me. We are taught to be polite. We are taught to give people the benefit of the doubt. We are taught that suspicion is rude. That is a lie. Politeness is a mask. Predators love it when you are polite. They rely on your fear of being rude to get close to you. They use your kindness as a weapon against you. Arthur Penhaligon bet his life on the fact that I would be too weak to fight back. He thought I was just a soft suburban nurse who would freeze when the axe came down. He was wrong. He forgot that nurses see death every day. He forgot that we fight for life with bloody hands. He forgot that a woman protecting her home is not a prey animal. She is the most dangerous creature on earth. So here is my advice to you. If you ever feel a chill running down your spine for no reason, do not ignore it. If your dog growls at a guest who brings you flowers, believe the dog. And if someone knocks on your door in the middle of a blizzard and asks for help, look at their eyes before you open the lock. Because sometimes, the monster doesn't have claws and fangs. Sometimes, he has a boyish haircut and a shy smile. Sometimes, he calls you mommy. I am Olivia Hartman. I survived the cold. I survived the fire. And I learned the most important truth of all. The inside really is more honest than the outside, and my inside is made of steel.